the other side of the challenges are you get to now decide what you want your life to look like. Often the values and beliefs that we have are assumed values and beliefs. What was your mother's values and belief? What do you see, reflected in your religious communities or in your cities? And then ask yourself, are those values and beliefs that are reflected in me? And if the answer is yes, but I want to change that, or no, not at all, then let's start defining, making new definitions about what it means to be successful, to be an empowered woman, to what freedom's definition is for you. And each woman gets to decide for herself. There's so much potential for unlimited freedom, unlimited resources if you are, really clear about what it is you value, what you believe, and what you want, and then creating a system to make that achievable.
Thank you guys so much for being here today. I am so excited for the conversation that we are going to have today. Today, I have Sydney Ashland on, and I met her in such a serendipitous way. She was on a podcast, which I love, Amy Porterfield's podcast on digital marketing, and she talked about a topic that is so near and dear to my heart as a physician. And the conversation was not really about digital marketing at all. It was more about relationships, specifically a marriage in a situation where the woman is in a high earning position or a high powered position, and how we navigate that. Because even though it's commonplace now, it's still not necessarily what culture has expected from us from when we were children, or even now a bit. And the responsibilities of what it means to be a wife and a mother and a husband and a father are different than they were 50 years ago. However, those cultural norms have not met where we are today as far as women in careers and for professional women. And so I thought it was a fascinating conversation. So I, being the overzealous person that I am, I reached out to Sydney, and I also learned that she worked specifically with physicians. And I was like, we need to talk, because this is a conversation that me and my friends need to hear and we need to learn about, because marriage is challenging. I think if you're in a marriage and it's not challenging, PM me, please, because I need to know what you're doing. But there are challenges, but it is also such a beautiful thing and such an adventure and journey that we can, if we lean into it and we lean into it correctly with the correct tools, we can make the most of our marriage and our lives. So I was so thrilled that Sydney said yes, that she would come on our show to discuss this in more detail with all of you. So from there, I'm going to let Sydney introduce herself. Sydney, would you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Well, thank you so much. I am a business consultant and coach that works with high-profile, high-earning individuals. I started out many, many years ago working with physicians primarily because I had been contacted by a physician who loved the work that I was doing, had referred several of her patients to me, and then started referring colleagues. And we started working a lot with physicians who were dissatisfied in their current roles, who wanted to have better work-life balance, who were depressed, who felt burned out. So having worked in the corporate setting, having worked in the field of medicine for some time prior to becoming a consultant and coach, I had some real tangible ideas of what physicians, the double binds physicians find themselves in, and helped develop a couple of hospitalist programs. And so really had an up close and personal sense of what was going on. So I love my work. I work with physicians who sometimes leave medicine to become entrepreneurs or sometimes become entrepreneurs within medicine, and those who just have small practices or concierge practices. So it's a great variety. I love it. And I'm happy to be here today.
Well, thank you so much. And I think Sydney introduced a really important piece of this is that she really understands what healthcare has done to physicians, and the system with which we're working in, and how that can contribute to the personal and professional and spousal challenges that we can face. And I'm really going to lean into that today because I think that's a really, really important piece of this, because the one of the purposes of this podcast is to help women and women physicians specifically recognize that they can have that life that is happy, right? It's
Hmm.
not like churn and burn at work, churn and burn at home, and then you are just kind of like dead and you don't and empty by the end of the day. And sadly, like as rewarding and wonderful as a career in medicine can be, not all of us are getting to experience that. And hopefully we can use this conversation to either get out of bad situations at
Hmm.
work or reframe to make that situation better for us than it is currently. So, Sydney, first, let's start at the beginning. What patterns have you seen in high achieving women, especially physicians, when it comes to like the emotional toll of success?
Well, I've witnessed firsthand what this, like you said, churn and burn environment does to women. And one of the first things that seems to be very common is hypercritical of self. That's the very first place that women often go, because they've become used to pushing themselves so hard and expecting so much of themselves that when they experience a level of intensity that's taking an emotional toll, rather than becoming soft and understanding or curious about it, they become hypercritical. After that initial response, often they start compartmentalizing, really not being their true authentic self in every area of their life, but compartmentalize who they are at work. What's the face that they show to the insurance companies versus the hospital administrators versus the clinic administrators versus patients? And so there's all of these compartments in their life that they manage with this hypercritical perception of what they should be. Secondly, or thirdly, they start to shut down their feelings once they've realized that no matter how much they do, they never really feel like they're doing enough. Then they start to shut down their feelings a bit. And from there, they can often become depressed. So that's sort of the cycle for women, the hypercritical sense of things, compartmentalizing, beginning to shut down feelings, and then full-blown depression.
Yeah, I can see that. And also, I think with women, especially once we become mothers, we get this like immense sense of responsibility. And I don't know how better to explain it, but I think a lot of us feel, and I know I feel this way, is that if I don't do this, and some of it's true with our children, right? Especially when, we have grown them with our bodies and we have nourished them with breast milk for their first year of life, like, and nobody else can do those things for them. We feel this insane intrinsic sense of responsibility that bleeds over not just to our children, but sometimes into other parts of our life, like our career, and as a physician too, as kind of the leader of a team, you can also feel that way, like this immense responsibility. And there's a lot of joy that can come with that responsibility, but there's a lot of stress and load that can come with that. Do you think that's a part of it?
Absolutely, that's a part of it. Too many hats, too many roles that we're playing, and how can you be, your authentic self in every role? And there also has to be a certain level of masking, right? That if you've been up all night with a baby, you can't be, complaining to your patients about it, because they're there because they're in distress. So the pressure becomes quite intense pretty quickly.
I think that's so true. And I think, of course, there's some component of compartmentalizing and masking that we have to live in having a professional career or just a life in general, right? Like you could have had a bad morning with your child, but you're still going to smile at drop off. Like it's just we have to function in the world. At the same time, there's a balance between that and showing up as your true authentic self. And I believe that sometimes we feel that our true authentic self is not enough and therefore we have to be something different. And especially in patient care, like I have a funny way of putting it, but I'm extremely introverted. And so when I go into a patient room, especially when I first started practice, I would almost like I would be me, but like an extra version of me, like a different version of me. And I would liken it to Beyonce because Beyonce supposedly is an introvert, and then her like stage persona is Sasha Fierce. So I would always call it like my Sasha Fierce that's here today, and so and I don't think it necessarily is a bad thing, but I have learned that I now have a direct care practice and I have a much smaller patient volume, a lot more control over my schedule and the care that I provide. And I feel that I am able to, yes, of course, I have like a professional persona that I bring to my office visits, but I also feel that I'm able to show up for my patients as my authentic self. We don't just talk about these are your labs, this is your result. And I think they appreciate some of the perspective on life because a lot of my patients are going through some of the same things that I do, or, that's how you connect with a person. And I think that's also something that particularly women love. Like, that's one of my favorite things about my career. It's like yesterday, like I was navigating, I had a patient who had a knee surgery and was in the hospital, and I was helping her navigate getting the nurse to get her the food that she wanted, and like the coordinating her medications because they were trying to give her insulin in the hospital, but she really did well on non-insulin medications, things that were like kind of mother henning her care and being her advocate. And I feel like now that I'm in a practice model that enables that and allows for that, I'm able to be that mother hen that I truly am and take care of my patients in a way that's very meaningful. And of course, the patient was extremely grateful and was like, "Gosh, I totally 150% understand why you practice the way you do more than I ever have before." She's like, "I understood it before, but now I really, really get it because the care that is standard is just it's not supportive or good." And like building those strong relationships really can light us up. And so I think you're right that being able to show up as our authentic self can be really, really helpful. Next question for you. As a coach, are there mindset blocks that come up for women, especially women who may be breadwinners for their families, but also are trying to balance being a caregiver, a leader, a healer? Do you feel like there are things stories we tell ourselves or things that we think that might be inhibiting us from getting that life that truly serves us?
Well, I think one of the first most common things that women do is compare and contrast with other women. We may be introverted or extroverted or somewhere in between, but we are social creatures, from going back, eons, women would join together and try and support each other in child rearing and in what they were doing in decades and centuries past. And so we're used to looking to our right or to our left and seeing what other women are doing. And unfortunately, the field of medicine really tends to isolate individuals in medicine. There's a little bit of the divide and conquer perspective in training. And so I think what women start to do is look around themselves to see what other women are doing. But unfortunately, they start making assumptions and projecting. Because I hear from women all the time, everybody else around me is doing just fine. They aren't struggling with, work-life balance. They aren't struggling with really feeling disillusioned or having lost parts of themselves even. It's only me. So that's, I think, where we have to start being really real with each other as colleagues, friends, and coworkers. We really need to start being real so that we're not living by some idealized imaginary standard that doesn't even really exist. So that's one mindset block. I think another is to having not had a ton of role models. Women are sort of blazing the trails themselves. It's not unusual for a woman to have a career. That's now standard. And yet, how do we do that? And so I think we don't have mindset solutions that are innate to us because we didn't have a lot of role models. So we feel very alone in it. So I think it's the isolation, the looking to others around us and making huge assumptions and projections, and feeling like we're never enough. That's also a huge mindset block. I can do more. I'm capable of more. I know I can do more. And although that's inspiring and even add, something that I admire, it's also very self-sabotaging because you can't be all things to all people. And that adage that you can have it all, I don't think is true. And when we try and live by that mindset, we feel like we missed the mark and are disappointed.
Yeah, I think that comparison is really challenging. I think also we have a tendency, and it may be worse in some cultures than others, to pretend things are really good or not share. And I do think that obviously there are some things that are personal and private, but that you might not want to, you have to share with your spouse only or something like that. But at the same time, when we can share our struggles, we can learn from each other, and we do learn from each other. And I'll give you an example. I had lunch with my girlfriends last Friday. They just came over and we had lunch because we got some new furniture that they wanted to see. And we were talking about our kids, and one of my friends was talking about her daughter and some concerns that she had, but she wasn't sure if she should be concerned about them. And in this little afternoon, three women, we came up with solutions. We gave each other resources. We provided each other with legitimate resources from Mayo Clinic and Harvard and really legitimate things that we can implement. And in so learning, later later that same weekend, my son basically threw a temper tantrum. And my husband was like, wow, he really had a pretty bad temper tantrum. What are we going, how should we address this? And I was like, well, actually, I was just talking with my friends about this, and I have all of these resources that I've reviewed, and actually one is sitting in the printer. So we can both read the resources that I've printed, and we can together come up with a plan on how to help my son's frontal lobe function better. He's 7, right? And I think that it was just this beautiful alignment of women coming together, sharing our struggles and not being judgmental of each other's struggles, but trying to find ways to solve problems. And not only did it serve the person who brought up the struggle, it also served all of the rest of us, not just in feeling understood, but also in a problem that arose later for me. And so I think that we are smart as individuals, but when we come together, we are so much better. Collaboration for anything good is always going to be better than one mind working alone. And I think that is so important that we be real with each other. And the other very specific place I see this that physicians are terrible at is talking about compensation, because physicians are not open about their compensation. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they don't want to tell somebody else that they're earning more, or they feel insecure that they might be earning less. But we know that there's a gender pay gap in medicine still. And so if we can be real with each other about what we're actually earning, that will help us all rise, that will help us come together and say, hey, why am I working the same amount as this other male doctor and earning less? And why are all the women earning less than the men for the same work product, or perhaps better work product, And so I think there's so much power in honesty. So I love that you bring that up. Many of our listeners are women who may be like the breadwinner, or out earn their spouse, or earn equal to their spouse, while still bearing a lot of the child related responsibilities. I think the statistic is that w- women who work in the home and women who work outside of the home both do about 80 or 80+% of child related responsibilities. I know that's true in my household. And I think partially my husband's hours are very challenging, but also I want to be the default parent. That's something that's important to me. And so to me, it doesn't feel, sometimes it feels unfair, but now that I've sort of understood the story that I want to tell, which is something that an an idea that you sort of planted in my head. Now that I understand the story that I want to tell, it's easy for me to say, okay, well, I'm choosing that I want to be the default parent, and I feel comfortable and confident in the decision that I've made to like pick the kids up from school and all the things that I do in the home. But I also can understand that this can be very challenging because of that cultural narrative that we've been told for so long. I would love to hear you touch on that, and how culture makes this dynamic where women are earning more and perhaps even out earning their spouses, how culture plays a part in that, and how that experience can go for both sides of a marriage.
Well, I think that what I've noticed is that, where we don't always acknowledge what we've internalized. So we've internalized beliefs and values from our family culture, but also from our, community cultures, from the collective, more um, societal culture. So there are many influences on us that we have internalized. And I think the most important thing is to acknowledge that, because that's where our sense of conflict arises from, is because we're sort of at odds with what we have internalized and what we want for ourselves. So I think to have conversations with your spouse about where they came from, what were the expectations for them, and what do they want for themselves, and then to share in kind what we feel about that. I've had many experiences where couples sit down and have that conversation and discover they're further apart than they knew they were, or they're much closer together. And if you're further apart in terms of influence and values, then you can just really look to complement each other versus feel like you're pulling in two opposite directions. And it needs to start with you and your spouse first, because that's the only way you can be a united front in the world at large and have a sense of this works for us and this is why. I think the other thing is you don't know what you don't know when you first start out. So the woman surgeon, the female surgeon who ends up saying, I love the fact that my husband is going to be a stay-at-home dad and that we're reversing roles. Well, we have to remember that when roles were reversed a couple decades ago, there was lots of oppression and lack of autonomy, and women felt very, very limited. And sometimes women can even bring that into the relationship at home and wonder why then their husband feels emasculated, or why, they're in so much conflict when it felt like such a great vision. So I think you just really have to stay on top of, how it evolves over time and be willing to change and pivot with, changing circumstances. So, I think that's where it begins.
I loved when you talked to Amy about how some of the things that we as women do can unintentionally be emasculating to our male spouse. Can you talk a little bit about that and what things that we might be subconsciously doing or accidentally doing that can actually make our spouse feel worse or
Mhm.
resentful?
Well, I think one of the things that we do and is quite common is to have expectations, unspoken expectations that we aren't owning about, what we expect a supportive partner to look like. And so if that person is doing things like taking time off to golf or belongs to a gym and is, staying in good shape, we can start to perhaps feel resentful, like I'm out there working my tail off and you're golfing with buddies or you're out at the gym and, I feel disrespected in that or underappreciated. And, our partners can begin to feel like they have to ask permission in order for it to be okay. And that's very emasculating, like, honey, please, can I go play golf with the guys? And then it's hard for women to feel really respectful of somebody who's groveling or asking for permission. So that doesn't feel good at all. The other thing is feeling guilty about the fact that you're away from the home so much, and then wanting for your spouse, like, I want you to have more friends. I want you to go out and do things, I want, and maybe even confidentially share with me that they feel a little bored with their spouse. It's like, when I met him, he was doing this and he had all of these dreams. And now, it's so mundane and boring. And I think that's another way to unconsciously emasculate because we're putting them in a double bind. I think double binds are really contributing factors to feeling disempowered, emasculated, not really a part of the team. And then sometimes men have a lot of guilt around the fact that they aren't the primary wage earner. And maybe they're getting pressure from their families, or they are getting teased by some of their friends about having a sugar mama, that's taking care of them. And then they feel underappreciated for the role they're playing that makes it possible for, their partners to be high achieving, really driven players in medicine. So that's what I witness.
Those are all things that resonate so much, and I'm sure they resonate with our listeners. I think obviously the first thing to do is identifying those behaviors or that language that we're using. But do you have any like tips or tricks or scripts or language that we might be able to use that could kind of untangle those
Mhm.
conversations?
Well, one of the things that I strongly encourage is that we really watch absolutist language. You always, you never, I'm always. I think that's a way of speaking that really is disempowering to both individuals, actually, because that extreme language starts to paint a narrative that is distorted. And then the other person feels like they have to defend. They feel criticized. They feel like they have to defend. And so then they're looking for all kinds of evidence to prove that that isn't true. And so that's one tip. Look for the distorted languaging. Um, Start talking about we and shared responsibility versus the I, because it's that collaborative language. That's what do we want to do with this rather than, well, I, it's the well, I that can really start to be experienced as a declarative statement rather than a collaborative statement. So, really looking for collaborative language versus declarative, independent language. We want to be interdependent, which means that we rely on each other in healthy ways, not ruggedly independent or codependent and enmeshed, because that's where we can also run into difficulty where we're almost afraid to be our full selves for fear of, harming the other individual or being too egotistical. So really watching your language.
Hmm. Can you define codependence for us?
Codependence is usually where we take turns being dominant or submissive. So, the woman who's I'll use a surgeon again, although I'm not trying to beat up on surgeons, but it's just a really good contrasting example. So, a woman who works in the OR all day has to be very organized, has a whole team supporting her in that organization. If you have somebody at home who's with children all day and who's trying to run a household, she's very likely to come home to chaos, to less than a organized, functioning environment. And so, that dominating energy of she's been calling the shots all day in the OR. And it's like, what's been happening here? Why is this and this and this and this? And starting to take over. And then perhaps whoever is left at home starts scrambling around. Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, we had this and starts to try to justify or explain. And then that doesn't feel good. So there's codependence in the sort of organized, disorganized, the overly helpful person who then requires that the other person be helpless. The person who overfunctions and then the other one underfunctions, the aggressive or passive aggressive versus assertive. So they're sort of, and we change hats, we move back and forth. It's not like male energy is always dominating and female energy is always submissive. Not at all. We play the role back and forth. So having difficulty managing that dominating, more submissive energy and finding that assertive place in the middle, and also enmeshment where we can't quite tell where we begin and end and where the other person begins and ends.
That's so fascinating. And I think that, when we're at work, we are getting stuff done. Like we are, maybe the healthcare system now makes this challenging, but like we know what we're doing. We are trained to do what it is that we do and very well trained, and we have a lot of experience. And so, while of course each patient is an individual, we're trained to handle that situation. Parenting and running a household is like you're making it up as you go, you know? And I think that honestly, like for a lot of us, work is easier than home life. And I think it's because it has like structure and the stakes are high, but like your child, there's no stake higher than your child. And so we're all like trying to figure it out the best we can. And so I think when you are in this structured environment and then it's juxtaposed with this very unstructured, there's no plan for this, it can be very jarring, especially if you're not recognizing that about yourself and you have expectations for someone else to be executing the home life in a similar fashion to how you're executing your work life. They're just not comparable in that way. And we as women, I think we're naturally, or a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us are naturally like, we see all the things, right? We see the things that are out of place. We see the undone laundry. We see all of those things the second we step in the door. I mean, I walk from our kitchen to my bedroom and pick up 10 things and replace them in the place where they're going to, where my husband can like walk from the kitchen to the bedroom without noticing anything, you know? And so I think when we're hyper vigilant and hyper aware of the things in our homes, and we're dealing with a spouse who has just different priorities, honestly, like they have their brains work differently. All of our brains work differently. It can be challenging, and I think it's very important for us to sometimes step back and let it be, and let them be, whether it's our kids or our spouses, and sit with that and be okay with that, and instead of resenting someone for not rising to your occasion, trying to be mindful and understanding of their priorities. And if it is really a problem, addressing it instead of withholding it until you explode, you know, I think.
Right. And I think one of the things that you just mentioned about the structure and then the control within the structure, but there's also power dynamics in medicine. You know, there's the power of the corporate structure that sort of contains it. There's the structure of the medical board and how it interacts and controls physicians, insurance companies, you know, even patient reviews that physicians are so anxious about. So there are power dynamics in medicine that are just almost accepted as normal. And so to transition to coming into the home where the optimum is where the power dynamics are collaborative and where it isn't that top-down structure can be really challenging. The other piece I hear a lot is the person who's been home all day often want somebody else to come home and start making decisions. I've said no all day long. I've made all the decisions about who's going to do what, where we're going to eat, what's happening. So turning to the spouse that comes home and say, "Okay, so what do you want to eat? Where do you want to go? What should we do?" And the person who's been making decisions all day at work doesn't want to make decisions either. And so there's this, you know, resentment that builds between the two, and decision making and the power dynamic becomes really, really important.
Yeah, when you're like, but I've been answering to this 7-year-old tyrant for the whole
Yes.
day.
Yes.
um, can you help me out here? I think one tip that I have to add in here, even though I'm not the expert, is planning. Like, take some of those decisions off of the table. Like, figure out what you're going to eat on Sunday night. So, like, you're not back and forth trying to make that decision. Figure out what your bedtime is. Figure out, like, have those things set so that, yeah, when we're all exhausted and our willpower is expended at the end of the day, we're not in a place of setting ourselves up for failure or fight or resentment or any of those things. It's just like kind of getting this stuff
Agreed. Yes,
done.
and yes, and in that planning, having a shared calendar that both people are contributing to is huge.
Some people are better at calendars than others, is what I've learned in my household. But no,
Uh-huh.
I think I couldn't function without my calendar. I don't like, I review it every Sunday evening, remove things that are not vital. And then I review it every evening to make sure I know what's going on the following day, because otherwise, between work and podcasts and um, kids and all of those things and after hours board meeting and things like that, it's just impossible. So I think probably a lot of people have a calendar system here, but if you don't, gosh, I don't know how you're functioning, but once you have one, I bet you'll be like, I don't know, able to take over the world or something like that, because it's so much, so actually it's vital. It's vital to have.
Freeing, right?
Freeing. Yeah. Sometimes people, like, I've had friends look at my calendar and they're like, your calendar is making me insane. I'm like, no, my calendar is my freedom, because now I know what's happening. And yeah, it's busy, but at least that's how I can manage it, and I get to do all the things. Like, I get to do so many cool things in my life, but it's because my time is organized and structured. So, yeah, the calendar, planning, organization, like sometimes people feel like that's too much work or that's too much structure. I want to be like, a little bit more laissez-faire, like a little bit more free-spirited. I'm like, no, the organization enables you to be free. It is your freedom. So, yeah, super important. That's it for part 1 of this conversation. If you're enjoying the discussion, be sure to tune in for part 2, where we'll continue the conversation and go even deeper. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it.